Our channel is dedicated to bringing you the most unique and interesting stories. Welcome to Internet Recap. Get ready to be captivated and to laugh at the real-life stories of everyday people. If you have any story recommendations, make sure to leave the timestamp on the comments. Like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more fun and interesting stories like this. What did your teacher do that you didn't realize until you were older was messed up? Story 1. He had a jar of punishments for whenever you broke one of the rules. Both the punishments and the rules could be created by the students, and if you broke the rules, you had to draw a punishment. Rules included everything from insulting another student, speaking out of turn, forgetting a pencil. The punishments all centered on public humiliation. And because it was a class of high schoolers given almost full reign, every class devolved into nothing but trying to bait other students into being punished or convincing the teacher they needed to be. Punishments included forcing students to get on hands and knees while pushing a penny across the room with their nose and saying, "Beep, beep, I'm a Jeep," performing the highly sensual Call on Me dance, requiring students to scoot up and down every aisle of desks on their butt like a dog while barking the whole time, or making one kid spend an entire class at the front of the room facing the wall wearing a little dunce cap. I forgot a pencil one day and had to stand at the front of the room while every student in the class balled up a piece of paper and threw it at me. One kid threw an entire notebook. I then had to crawl around on the floor and clean up all the trash. The teacher ended up getting reported at the end of the year after I and several other students complained about it unofficially to a different teacher, and while he wasn't fired, the jar of punishments was gone the next year. Story 2. After the Columbine incident, schools started to have all sorts of procedures set up in case of an active shooter incident. At my high school, we were taught if an announcement was made over the PA of a certain fake faculty member to report to the main office, that was our cue to shelter in place and take shelter in the classrooms. Once a year, we had the drill, and every time it lasted about 5 minutes. We had a teacher, though, that was just a little bit off. I had him for a class during 8th period of my junior year, and as time went on, the whole class kind of figured he just was a very serious, quirky, kind man. On one particular day, about 10 minutes into class, he tells us all to get under our workstations because he heard the coded announcement. We all hid till the end of the period in our positions, until the end of class bell rang. Our classroom was at the end of the school, and it was generally quiet outside, so we never questioned whether this was a drill or not. This happened 2 more times during the year. We eventually just figured that he wanted to test us with his own drills. Looking back on it, and by talking to some of my former classmates, turns out he was faking active shooter drills to get the class to shut up at the end of long days. Story 3. A 4th grade teacher pulled the chair out from under a mentally disabled student. She also told us a lot of really personal stuff about her marriage. I told my mom, and she had me taken out of the class. The teacher protested, so we had a meeting with the principal, wherein I told her all of the things I knew about my teacher's marriage. I got out of the class. I had a 2nd grade teacher, not my 2nd grade teacher, but she taught the other 2nd grade class in the adjacent classroom, who used to give students birthday spankings, over her knee, and 1 spank for each year. So luckily we were only taking 6 or 7 spanks. After the final spank, you'd get a pinch to help you grow. Never got them, but I saw them many times. At the time, I didn't think much of it. Heck, kids thought it was fun. Looking back on it now, well dang, you can bet that wouldn't fly these days. Story 4. I used to have a homeroom in the morning that was overseen by one of our PE coaches. Not the stumpy middle-aged coach, the young, handsome, looks like he almost made it to the majors coach. They adored him. I mean adored him. And they would all sit on his desk and talk to him and giggle at everything he said. Some of them started doing things like playing with his hair and tugging on his clothes. Before the end of the year, he would have multiple 15 and 16-year-old girls sitting on his lap over the course of the morning. At the time, I just sort of laughed it off, if not a bit jealous even, but now I realize, holy crap. I found out a few years later he had been fired from his previous school because he and the school nurse got caught banging in a utility closet. Not gonna lie, I'm kind of curious what ended up happening to that dude. Story 5. The music teacher at my elementary school did all kinds of creepy stuff. The one that stands out for me was that every Easter, he would have us do the bunny hop. except it mostly consisted of us standing still in a bunny hop pose while he came around to inspect our tails. We knew something wasn't right about him, but as kids we didn't really understand the full extent of the creepiness. It was just something to joke about. A bunch of parents finally complained to the school about him, and shortly afterward he moved to a different school district, supposedly because he would be able to make more money from private lessons there. Yep, he offered private in-home music lessons. A friend of mine took lessons from him briefly, and apparently he insisted on absolute privacy while the lessons were going on. The door had to be closed, and her parents weren't allowed to open it. Story 6. My grade 7 shop teacher had a bottle of Pepsi that, depending on how late in the day shop class was, would get significantly less Pepsi-colored. Shockingly, he only had 3 fingers on one hand. Never heard a reason for this. Every time we asked, there was a different story. My favorite story, though, was a bunch of us were at the local burger shop. We were in high school at this point, and Mr. L came in. We got to asking him what he was up to now, and he told us he was teaching at the local composite school. If you got expelled, etc., you went to comp. Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. It was Tuesday at 2-ish. When we mentioned this, he grabbed his coat and ran out. He came back in 2 minutes later saying, frick those little mustards, and waited for his burger. What are some things that people don't realize would happen if there was actually a zombie outbreak? Story 1. Most of the survivors after the initial collapse wouldn't perish because of the zombies. Fire. As millions of people flee into the wilderness, they'll begin making fires for warmth, security, cooking food, and boiling water. Many of these fires, set and maintained by inexperienced refugees, will get out of control in a world without firefighters. Others will be started deliberately by people trying to stop zombies or accidentally during battles between factions of survivors. Buildings will burn, and prairies and forests, chemical plants, and God help us, probably more than one nuclear plant in the world, will ignite as their contents go unmonitored and untended. And this is added to the more than 20,000 fires started every year in the United States by lightning strikes. Not only will there be huge clouds of toxic smoke to deal with and raging wildfires, but the long-term effects of these will hurt the chances of any survivors. The release of all those aerosols will suppress cloud formation, meaning the year or two following the initial collapse will be cold and dry, and any storms that do appear will be much stronger. Campsites will be buried in snow or washed away by mudslides, then burned-out forests are hit by spring flooding. Disease. The abandoned cities, filled with millions of corpses and unalive pets and tons of rotting food for all of them, will breed a bumper crop of scavengers. Rats, opossums, raccoons, cockroaches, flies, they'll all feast. The same will apply in the rural countryside, where the CAFOS, concentrated animal feeding operations, will fall one by one. In many, the farmers will have opened the doors for their pigs and chickens and cows. In others, zombies will pick off the livestock, shambling through the cows and eating until they rupture their own guts. In many, though, thousands of animals will perish in piles, and their decomposing corpses will poison rivers with bacteria. Mosquitoes will breed in the billions, as basements flood and buildings collapse and water pools in the nooks and crannies of overturned cars. At first, the refugee camps will set up boilers for their water and ingenious gravity-powered charcoal filters. But bit by bit, this improvised infrastructure will be abandoned as survivors flee. Many people will have to drink from rivers tainted by chemical spills, gasoline, unalive animals, corpses, or simply a zombie upstream that got its leg pinned under a rock. Many others will eat food contaminated by roaches or rats. Many people will simply do their best to deal with their waste in a world without toilet paper or hand sanitizer, and fail. Dysentery, cholera, cryptosporidium. They'll take millions. Exposure. Most people won't end their lives in the first couple of months, but many will in that first winter, which will be much harsher than usual. They'll underestimate the power of the colds. They'll underestimate how much to eat, how much they should cover up. They'll be running in tennis shoes through 3-foot drifts. And as survivors become truly desperate, competition for food and the best shelters will spawn a new wave of violence. Story 2. It's stupidly easy to contain a zombie infection. Realistically, even if a bunch of people got infected and there's no going back once you've turned, then there's really nothing stopping cops or the military from dumping everything they see that makes a zombie sound or just carpet bombing whatever horde they see from the sky. They'd probably mount automatic shotguns to the sides and fronts of cars and drive around downtown blasting everything in a 360-degree radius. Heck, knowing today's world, Jeff Bezos would probably retrofit the Walmart robot to casually push zombies away from the storefront with an oversized broom. Shoot, they wouldn't even have to use bullets. Hop on the APC and run them over. What is a zombie gonna do against a 160mm of steel alloy armor moving over it at 40 miles per hour? Also, the only headshots count would be a movie thing only. A zombie that's been detonated to bits and whose only danger is me tripping on it is not a threat. All you gotta do is render them immobile or unfunctional. Horror movie tropes aside, a crawling zombie with no arms and legs would still be pathetically easy to avoid. Do me a favor, get a friend, get on your belly, and try to play catch with him while crawling without using your arms and legs. You can't. Unless those zombies learn to do the worm, we're pretty safe if we give them a good baseball bat to the knees. Even if we are dealing with a total apocalypse scenario, what most people don't realize is that a zombie's worst enemy is the weather. Florida zombies become goo in less than 2 weeks. Alaska zombies turn into a popsicle in the first 36 hours. That is, if a gator doesn't get them, or a bear. Also, calories must be consumed to sustain brain and muscle activity. People can say what they want about zombies, but the common consensus is the body doesn't move without a working brain and muscle system, undead or not. And most lore states that zombies are not paranormal, so this means a zombie gotta eat if he wants to move. If he doesn't eat, then his body will consume his muscle tissue to keep other bodily functions going. If 99% of the population has turned into zombies, what will they eat? Each other? They'd be walking beef jerky sticks at this point. No magical virus is going to keep your decaying body from getting affected by things like time, weather, the sun, and carrion. It will rot, and from the perspective of a bear, a zombie would equal about 180 pounds of shuffling free meat that is only dangerous to the hairless human apes. A zombie would be walking buffet to cats, dogs, birds, bears, frick, everything that enjoys a free lunch. A zombie outbreak would be equal to a worldwide horror-themed holiday. A vampire outbreak, on the other hand, well, I suppose we'd also be safe with that one, if only we did not invite the frickers inside. Story 3. Holding up anywhere in a city, or even on the city side of a suburb, is a losing proposition. Sure, there's lots of supplies in the city, but there's no food, and virtually no water, and lots and lots and lots of zombies. And those supplies? Yeah, they were all looted in the first frantic days, and are now dispersed all over the place in individual hidey holes in random buildings. Won't be able to just go to the Home Depot after the initial panic has been resolved and expect there to be anything worth having. And the roads? They're going to be completely clogged with dead cars, likely filled with zombies. So you're not going to be able to just find a car with gas and drive out of the city either. So you'll be stuck with no supplies but what you could hold on to during those first few days, with little food, no water, no safe way of moving around, and millions of zombies. Story 4. Once the zombie virus hits, that doesn't mean that other diseases, natural dangers, accidental injuries, and predatory animals no longer exist. You also won't have easy access to things like flu shots, hydrogen peroxide, etc. Also, lots of people say that once the zombie virus hits, they'd go hole up in a Costco or something because of all the supplies. However, what they don't understand is that everyone is going to go hole up in a Costco. And I think that while you should have a zombie survival team with you, you definitely don't want half of a city in your hideout. Personally, I'm going to go hit up a Dino Mart or something when the zombie virus strikes. Nobody's going to be looting Dino Mart. Men, what's the best compliment you've ever received from a girl? Story 1. In hindsight, you're a good man and I don't deserve you, or you deserve better than me. When I was still single, I used to hate when girls said that. I thought it was just girls fishing for compliments, and for me to say, "Oh no, baby, you're perfect," or some crap. Thought it was an excuse to break up or reject me because they didn't want to be around me. In the long run, though, every single girl who said that to me ended up treating me like crap or being more interested in someone else. So in a sense, they didn't deserve me, and I did deserve better than they treated me. After years of being married to my wife and having our lovely family, I realized that it really was a compliment because I did deserve better than them, and I got it. Now that I know what I have, I'm grateful I didn't settle. Story 3. I was in college and walking between classes and decided to get a snack from a vending machine. The girl in front of me put her order in, but the item got stuck against the glass, and apparently she didn't have any more and was a tad upset. I stepped up, ordered the item directly above her, it vended correctly, and jarred her item loose in the process. She had a big, beaming smile and said, "My hero." Mike, always meddling in other people's issues. Classic Mike, am I right, boys? If there was only a name we could remember him by. Story 7. I was drunk once at a party and ran into an old classmate who I used to have a crush on. I'd lost my friend I'd come there with, so I ended up hanging out with him. When the party transitioned to the bars, he held my hand while we walked there. He'd worked for his dad's roofing company every summer since high school. His hands were huge and so calloused and rough, I was like, sploosh. Story 8. Me and my ex had been friends for a pretty decent amount of time, and when I finally told her that I fancied her and asked her out, she got really confused. When I told her what was up, she answered that she fancied me too, but always thought I was too handsome for her. We were only a thing for 5 months, but I'll never forget that comment. Still makes my day whenever I think about it. Story 9. My personal favorite, I was feeling kinda down, so I went to get me a Cinnabon. In my immediate family, my siblings all have bright-colored eyes, but me, very dark brown. Anyways, I was getting my order, and the girl working looked at me for a few seconds and told me that my eyes were really nice because they sparkled. It has made me appreciate them a lot more since then. Story 10. I was seeing this girl for a couple months, and she was really sick one time. Her roommates at the time kept the house really cold to save money. She had a terrible fever and was freezing, so I went and picked her up and brought her to my house and took care of her for a few days. She told me I was a really genuine person, and I still think about it a lot. Story 11. I had an ex-girlfriend who bumped into me a few years after we broke up, and she backhandedly complimented me by saying, "Wow, you've put on some muscle. You look great. You actually look like a man now." I managed to blurt out, "Thanks, so do you." Just late enough for it to be awkward instead of clever. Story 12. I told my husband that my best friend thought he was a real catch. He hated my friends. I hoped it would soften him towards one of them at least. When the marriage ended years later, he texted her for a booty call. She told him to F off. He'd never spoken to her, but clearly he remembered it. Story 13. I used to be a nude model for a life drawing class in college, and I was told that I have a pretty weenus. Not impressive in size or girth or anything, but uniform and a nice ratio. Look, fam, if there was a scale of hotness going from 1 to 10, you'd be a firm 6. Yeah, she said I'm like a solid 6.5. Story 14. One of my best friends used to stroke and play with my hair. I don't know why, many thought my hair was silky and soft. She ended up falling in love with me. Now I'm just really conscious about my hair because she told me it was my main attraction. Main attraction. Story 15. My ex-girlfriend and I remained friends. When discussing our current dating lives over a drink, she told me that if there was a Yelp for people, she'd give me an amazing review. Felt pretty fantastic that someone who didn't work out with relationship-wise still saw a lot of good in me. What happened the first time you saw the fury of a patient man? Story 1. Me and a few of my friends used to frequent a pub in my hometown. It was a small place in the town center, a traditional English pub, complete with attractive barmaid and consistent regulars, us included. Every time we were in there, a guy would sit down at the bar on his own with a half a bitter. He'd occasionally join the bartender, but was never loud or drunk. He was a nice bloke, always said hello, and smiled. We knew him only as Ray. Now Ray was about 60, but fit, not big, just a normal-looking guy. A few forearm tattoos, pretty standard for the north of England in the 90s. One Saturday afternoon, me and 4 of my friends were having our usual couple of drinks. As it was Saturday, there was a football match on. 3 away fans walk into the pub, already a brave move. but this is a friendly place, so everyone eyes them suspiciously but carries on drinking. They walk to the bar and immediately start being horrible to the barmaid, making lewd comments, complaining loudly about the beer, other stuff like that. Ray looks at these three guys and says, "No need to be rude, boys. She's here to do a job." Cue a stream of verbal abuse from the away fans. "Shut the F up, granddad. What are you going to do about it?" etc. The regulars are having none of this. Everyone, me included, stands up and stares at these idiots. Ray turns to everyone and just says, "Sit down, lads. I'll deal with this." Turns to the away fans. "You three, outside, now." These three guys, obviously there for a fight anyway, are all, "Freaking come on then, granddad, let's go." They all walk out of the bar, and not 20 seconds later, Ray walks back in, without a word, sits back on his stool, and sips his half a bitter. Curiosity got the better of us, so we all ran outside to see complete carnage. Two guys out cold on the pavement, one on his backside with blood pouring out of his nose. It turns out that Ray was an ex-sass, and the barmaid was his daughter. That went from 0 to awesome in an instant. Story 2. My dad. About a decade ago when I was in high school, we lived on a hill, and if you go down the hill, it leads into the main part of town where all the shops and other stuff are. And if you go up, over the other side, it's where a lot of the bars and clubs are. It's quicker to go over than around, obviously. Back then, my parents each had a car instead of sharing one, and only one space in the garage, and drunk idiots were constantly damaging Mom's cars. Well, one night, Dad happened to have a day off fall on the weekend, and he could hear a group of drunk people walking up the road. His little office, computer room is at the very front of the house. So he gets up, goes out the front door, and just waits near the front lawn, watching. They're being loud and pushing each other around. Mom's worried and comes to get me because she doesn't want him to get hurt by some drunk idiot, and I go out to see what he's doing. They end up pushing each other around more, and one bumps into the car and is leaning on it, and the hood of the car. Dad tells him to get away from it. They start taunting him, so he walks closer towards them, and one of the little mustards clean smashes the side mirror off while laughing at him. Dad is a 6'8" ex-basketballer, basically is just all around freaking huge, and is small man bait on a normal day. Dad hit him straight in the jaw, and you could see his jaw completely broken. The guy is immediately screaming and bawling his eyes out at the same time, while his friends pick him up and run away. Never heard from them again, or got in any trouble for it. Dad just went back inside and watched TV. Yeah, let's break the mirror off this 6'8" guy's car. Wise move. Story 3. My little brothers are twins, fraternal. M is emotional, high-strung, and always getting himself in trouble because he can't keep his mouth shut. P is the exact opposite. Very calm, very rational, very quiet. At the time of this story, they were about 10. We lived across the street from the elementary school, and I was out of school, so I'd often chill on the front porch with a book and keep an eye on the kids across the street. One day, I hear M's voice start to spin up. I look up and he's facing down some kid, red in the face and about a step from swinging or crying. I'm not sure which. I get up and start to head over, and I've just stepped onto the grass across the street when M's antagonist says, quite clearly, "Your birth certificate was an apology letter from the abortion clinic." The twins know what an abortion is. M goes silent, shocked and hurt, and tears start to well up in his eyes. I'm furious, and a teeny part of me is laughing because holy crap, that one was new. But before I can say anything, here comes P, with a flying punch straight to the side of this kid's head. Knocked him right on his butt. M is shocked out of his tears. I'm flabbergasted over watching a 10-year-old perform an absolutely beautiful airborne sucker punch. P stands over the kid, practically snarling, until I make it up to them. The kid sees P is distracted by me walking up and takes off. I march the twins back home. "I'm kind of proud of you, dude," I tell P. "Sticking up for your brother like that?" P gives me the flattest look I've ever seen on a child. "I wasn't protecting him," he says. "That's my birth certificate, too." Stone cold. Story 4. My uncle is the most peaceful person I know. He's essentially a living version of what would happen if you combine General Eero, Bob Ross, and Dr. Dolittle. He keeps a garden, feeds wild birds out of the palm of his hand, has been known to just walk up to a deer without it running away. I've never heard him raise his voice, except to talk to someone really far away in my entire life. He was in the military during Vietnam, not sure what branch. He never saw a combat zone. He was the guy who fixed stuff that came back from a combat zone. The war ends, he goes home and returns to his normal life working at a tire factory. One night he's getting off of a hard day at work and wants a drink, so he goes to the local bar. 3 guys are standing outside talking amongst themselves, and he goes to walk in. But they stop him. He tells them he doesn't want any trouble. He's just had a stressful day at work and wants to grab a drink. They go back and forth for a while, and eventually he just pushes past them to get in. They didn't like that and pulled him back, where he proceeded to knock one unconscious and floor another. The third backed off and let him inside. By the time he'd left, they were nowhere to be seen. They say that if you're special forces or some stripe or another, you never actually will claim you were in anything special. You'll claim that you were a fuel guy or a mechanic or anything else that's not glamorous. So I'm just saying. Story 5. Greg versus Jimmy. This one guy who was in our year at school was gigantic. We'll say his name was Greg. Greg hit 6 foot tall at the age of 15 and had a beard coming in a few years before that. He was intimidating as heck. But he was the nicest guy you'd ever meet. I still have a ton of time for him all these years later. Genuine model of a good person. Anyway, he was being teased all year by this butthole of a boy. Let's call him Jimmy. Jimmy had some self-esteem issues and used to pick on younger kids constantly. But when he set his sights on gentle Greg, knowing he wouldn't retaliate, it got interesting. Jimmy was rarely in school, but would still hang out about the school gates with about 6 or 7 pals waiting for Greg to appear. Then bolt when he finally did. One weekend we were all out street drinking, as you do, and Jimmy and co. jumped Greg. Greg went mental. A couple of Jimmy's pals held us back while Greg managed to knock 4 of the guys clean out before they brought him down. It was like watching the Hulk fight. Jimmy obviously bolted before the actual fighting began. The next Monday at school, he was back to his usual self again, or so it seemed. I didn't witness the next part myself, but I wish I did. Greg hit Jimmy with an uppercut so forceful that he was launched across a school desk and was advised to leave education. Justice. Now I'm imagining Jimmy rocketing across the desk and landing at the foot of an official who shakes his head and intones, "Boy, I advise you to leave education." Story 6. I worked with this theater director who was well known for being one of the nicest and most intelligent people you can meet. But there was one actor in this show who was a grade A pain in the butthole. She would constantly be late for rehearsals. Once she didn't show up at all. The reason was her girlfriend was in a car accident, but the problem was she didn't tell the stage manager, director, or anyone she wasn't coming. We found out through Facebook. This was a show with some deaf cast members, and some hearing actors who didn't know ASL had to do some signing, so we brought in an ASL instructor. This woman, though, did know some ASL and thought she knew better than the college professor and would constantly try to correct her. We were doing a spacing rehearsal in one of our touring spaces with very limited time. This is 2 months into the rehearsal process, and the director has finally had enough of her having a backhanded comment for everything. He adjusts her blocking slightly, just because the space we're in is a bit different. She starts to say something, and the director just screams, "This show isn't about you, god dang it!" And he throws his script to the ground so that pages fly everywhere. It's the first time any of us have ever heard him yell or curse in anger. She runs off stage crying. Then he calmly says, "Can we get back to work, please?" And then later, during a break, I overhear him talking to her about how he's going to tell everyone he knows in theater never to hire her or work with her again. Story 7. My grandfather is a saint. My grandmother had a 99% fatal blood cancer back in the day, in the 60s, and they went to Cleveland Clinic as a last hope option. Neither were religious, but they prayed that night, and he promised to live his life as the best Christian possible if my grandmother was cured. 2 weeks later, while still waiting for treatment options, there was no blood cancer detectable anymore. So he's that kinda good Christian man. My aunt was 12, and she and the neighbor boy were making out on the couch. According to her, no hanky-panky. Well, the rumor mill went full tilt, and the neighbor boy's mom came over to the house to accuse my aunt of being weird. Aunt opened the door, and the lady called her weird. Well, my grandma was in the kitchen and took off running, speared the lady off the front porch and into the front yard and started beating on her. This isn't crazy. My mama was fury bottled into a 4'11" frame. Well, the neighbor's husband comes over to break it up and pulls my grandma off, then draws back like he aimed to hit her. My grandpa walked onto the porch about this time and said, "Buzz, if you hit my wife, I'll end the life of your whole dang family." Everyone I've talked to about the incident said the calmness in his voice is what gave them shivers. I've even talked to an old man buzzard about it, and he tells it like everyone else does. My dad said he had absolutely no doubt that my grandpa would have done it. He's never said anything and not done it. Story 8. I knew a girl who was living with a guy who had a severe anger management issue. He had kept it under control for the few years they had lived together, but one day he snapped over some minor issue, hit her repeatedly, banged her face in the concrete, and tried to choke her until a passerby stopped him. So obviously the relationship was over, and she was going to fetch her stuff from the apartment. She likewise obviously didn't want to go alone, so me, 2 other friends, and her brother, who I also knew, tagged along to keep things in check and to help carry stuff. When we arrive, her ex gives us an attitude, which causes her normally extremely mild and docile brother to snap completely. He smacked the guy up against the wall with one hand and punched him repeatedly with the other, holding him up against the wall all the time because you don't hit someone who is down. We just stood there in shock and awe. Given the way the girl looked after the beating, she had received black and blue bruises, her entire face scraped, choke marks around the neck, and so on. We didn't care much what was going on, and just let him punch him out. Then we got her stuff and left as he started to wake up. 2 times during the following months, the ex was jumped twice when moving outdoors in the evening. I don't know who did it, and I don't want to know. I guess everybody has their trigger. Story 9. Back in uni, one guy I knew on greeting and small talk terms, but not much more, was known as the literal rock against the waves. Childish freshmen picked on him for being retarded, et al., for ages, and he just shrugged it off. You need to imagine him as a gentle giant, 6'9"-ish, and arms as thick as my thigh, but very sweet and lovable. Hobbies included caring for shelter kitties and posting reviews for oddly specific music theory books online. I eventually became friends with him, and we hung out sometimes, grabbing a coffee and such, and one day we were avidly discussing something when 3 of the childish freshmen came by and pestered him. He informed them twice that we were currently talking, and they should not disturb us, please and thank you. With foreseeable success, he just shrugged and tried to continue our talk over their pestering. Frustrated that they did not succeed, one of them resorted to the last straw of a childish bully and called his mother weird. Fun fact, his mother passed away when he was 14 and he never fully came to terms with it. He took a deep breath, stood up and grabbed the offender by his head, swinging him like a club at the others and kicking them into next Tuesday when they all were on the ground, before I and 2 others finally could pull him off and he instantly calmed down. Too long didn't read, a gentle giant from uni snapped and literally beat a mofo with another mofo. Story 10. Twice in 20 years, I've seen the fury of my very patient, docile, and kind stepdad. The first time was when some 12th graders chased my brother and cousin all the way from school to our backyard, threatening their lives with pocket knives. Stepdad calmly walked to the backyard, grabbed the big kids by their throats, and lifted them up, pinning them to the fence. "Stay the heck away from my kids," was all he said in a calm, teeth-biting kind of way. The kids booked it faster than I've ever seen anyone run, and never bugged my brother or cousin again. Then we all went inside and made burgers. The second time was in my angsty preteen years when I called my mother a witch. He turned at me, and I've never been so scared in my life. This time he was right ticked off and screamed at me until I was backed up against our bar counter, shielding myself with the bar stool legs. The second he backed off slightly, I booked it into my bedroom and barricaded myself in with all the furniture I could find. Didn't come out for a solid day until I got up the courage to apologize. But he's a teddy bear normally. Hey, a teddy bear is still a bear. What's something that is common knowledge at your workplace that will be mind-blowing to the rest of us? Story 1. Former prison guard here, Most inmates do not have access to weights more than 2 to 4 times per month, and only if they've earned it with good behavior. The going rate for cigarettes on the prison black market is $100 a box. If you're willing to go a few years without any friends, and if you have about $100 a month of expendable income, depending on your crime, you can go your entire sentence without being in a fight or joining a gang. Debauchery happens in prison, but it isn't nearly as common as it was 30 years ago. Inmates have an anonymous hotline they can call if they want to report a debauchery, and now there are cameras almost everywhere except for cells. That's where most debauchery happens, and there's not a lot prison guards can do to stop it. 95% of what you see in prison TV shows or movies is creative thinking. Your first day in prison, I do not recommend picking a fight with the biggest, toughest looking guy in prison, or fighting with the first person who's a butthole to you. It won't make you look tough. More likely, you'll just go to SEG for a few weeks before getting kicked out into a new unit, where you'll have to do it all over again. Instead, find out who's in charge of your race. If you're white, it'll probably be Aryan Brotherhood or Peckerwood. Then either join up and ask how much it costs to be protected. This is called paying rent. You won't make any friends paying rent, so plan on reading a lot. If you don't have the money or the desire to be extorted, you can join the gang. I wouldn't recommend this unless you're going to be down for a long time. You'll start out on the bottom of the prison gang hierarchy. After an initial training period of working out, you'll be asked to do hits on enemies of the gang. The shot callers will tell you who and when you'll be attacking, and you'll be expected to follow through. The problem with this is that you'll likely be given additional time on your sentence, so if your goal is to get out of prison, this isn't the recommended route. Plus, you'll be required to get gang tattoos, which will make it difficult to live normally after prison, and are often accompanied with hepatitis C, HIV, and TB. It depends on the state, but guards in the towers are carrying weapons with live ammunition. Prison guards tend to be rednecks with fairly good aim. If you're going to kick someone's butt, don't do it in the yard. If you're perceived by a tower guard as putting someone in a position of substantial bodily harm or risk of life, you will be ended. Perimeter towers are also armed with live ammunition. If you're going to try to escape, your best bet is tunneling out or stealing a guard uniform or impersonating a staff member, etc. Over the fence will probably get you shot, unless you have friends who have bribed the guard in the tower. If you're in for anything carnal, you're gonna have a bad time. Too long didn't read, don't go to prison, it sucks. Story 2. A lot, probably most, research in the physical sciences isn't conducted on awesome supercomputers. Usually it'll be your standard Dell-type office desktop. However, we have to keep around some old Unix workstations. God, I hate Solaris, just so we can run programs from the 70s that no one has enough time for, or slaves grad students to port the code to something modern, like Windows 3.1. Seriously, I was going through the code once for shoots and giggles, and came across instructions on how to run it on VAX. It drives me crazy at work. Technology companies don't give a care at all about your privacy. They regularly steal and take data and use it for internal analytics. The only part of privacy and security that they care about is what you see. Facebook, this isn't to blame them, but it's true, has convinced everyone that taking and using users' data is totally kosher. Be aware, there is a great diversity of opinion on this, and that is fine. The company I work for is a small startup, about 45 people. Our CEO and marketing guys just want user data and don't care about anything else. This isn't to say that the data we keep is enormously sensitive, purchasing patterns and things of that type, but nowhere do we inform the user that we're gathering their data. We also collect user emails for a specific purpose, sending receipts, but I have seen these used to send unsolicited spam. It is not true that all companies do this. I think Apple has the strongest record of the big companies in protecting privacy, but it seems very common among small companies, and especially startups. These guys are desperate to make it rich and do not always have great respect for their customers. They very often take the view that their investors, or really their next investors, are their real customers. The point was made about Facebook. If you're not paying, you're not the customer, you're probably the product. I think the key thing is letting people know that you're collecting and using their data in a straightforward, plain English way. Almost no one does this. When it comes to security, I stand by what I first wrote. It is almost always only after a huge security leak, see LinkedIn or Google Wallet for recent examples, occurs that a company will start to impose strict security. All those apps you download that have any of your data, some dude wrote that and very likely did spend an extra month making it safe. Story 3. At Chick-fil-A, we accept any other restaurants and fast food coupons. Say you have a coupon for a free sandwich at McDonald's, we would accept that and give you a free one. Also, if you were to get up to the drive-thru and realize you had left your money elsewhere, we usually will comp your meal and tell you to pay it back next time. Of course, this is if the meal is in moderation and not a huge order. I will try to find out if the policy is just our store or everywhere. I've been with the company for about 6 years now, so it is very possible it has changed. Also, we do accept Chick-fil-A coupons that have expired no matter what, and ones from other Chick-fil-A's. Usually I don't even look at the expiration date because of this reason. Asked my boss about the coupons from other stores. It is per store if the owner wants to. He said he would have no problem with it since no one really knows about it. If y'all have any more questions about Chick-fil-A, I would love to answer them. The coupon thing honestly sounds like an attempt at making me look like an absolute idiot. Slides Burger King coupons across the counter. Sir, this is Chick-fil-A. But this guy on the internet... Story 4. Virtually all of the forests you hike in, camp in, hunt in, and ride your bike through were once either farmland or pasture, or logged at some point in time. 99% of the forest land east of the Mississippi in the US and in Europe were all once cut down, and almost none of the original old-growth forests remain in the state where they were before man cultivated the land. Notable exceptions are high mountaintop forests, steep ravines, and specially conserved tracts of land held privately by concerned landowners. Many hardwood forests in the U.S. were cut down between 1750 and 1900, and are in the process of secondary succession, whereby new pioneer species take over, and a new forest slowly matures. These secondary forests aren't always of the same species as the one that existed before being cut down. Many of the American chestnut and American elm species, which once comprised some of the most massive and beautiful trees and made up to 60% of forest stands down the Appalachian Mountains, have been killed off by introduced diseases from Europe. I should have stated that I'm a forester, and I do most of my work out in the woods, and occasionally in front of a couple computer screens making maps using GIS software. Story 5. I worked at an optometrist's office for about 2 years and sold glasses. We sold more high-end stuff, but basically had everything. What some people don't realize is that if your prescription is really strong, you should shell out the extra money for the better lens material and maybe for that anti-reflective coating. It will make a huge difference in clarity, especially if you drive at night. If you have a really low prescription, frick it. Get the cheap lenses, you won't notice. Also, if you wear contacts, give your eyes a break every now and then. If you wear them from the moment you wake up until right before you go to bed, your eyesight will get way worse, way faster. You risk serious infection, and you're kind of suffocating your eyes. Even if you have the kind that you can wear for 30 days straight, you sure as heck better have at least one pair of crappy glasses you can wear if you ever tear a lens, injure your eye, or lose or run out of contacts. I swear I'm like the only person who takes my contacts off at night anymore. Story 6. Healthcare worker. If we have to phone a patient at home and someone else answers, we are not allowed to identify where we are calling from or why. So, say we need to ring John Q. Citizen and his wife answers, then we can only say, "May I speak to John Citizen, please?" Wife will ask us who it is. Our name. Wife will ask, "Where are you from? Why do you need to speak to John?" "I can't discuss that with you. Could you please put John on the phone?" Etc., etc. It causes so many issues. We would love to just say, "I'm calling about his blood test," but we are legally not allowed to do so. I'm not being obstructionist or rude. Please just suck it up and pass the phone over. This makes perfect sense. My preceptor gave an example that explains why. "Hello, Ms. X. This is John from the so-and-so women's clinic calling with your pregnancy test results." Turns out that Mr. X answered the phone and that he had a vasectomy some years ago. Story 7. I work at a food bank. Despite lots of people thinking a food bank's primary responsibility is to give food directly to hungry people, food banks are actually typically distributors and hubs where agencies, such as soup kitchens, pantries, churches, etc., pick up food to give directly to people in need. Yes, some banks, like mine, do have programs that give food directly to people, but overall the main goal of a food bank is bringing in and storing food to distribute to other groups and organizations. Also, our food purchasing power is almost 10 times the average consumer. So while giving canned food makes a lot of people feel better than a monetary donation, we really are able to buy so much more food with the same amount of money someone may have spent going to the grocery store to buy us canned food. Please leave your stories in the comments. I'd love to make a video of them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.